What's going on, everybody? Boris here at the Ecology Design Studio. In the previous video, we covered some of the tools that we want to use in our development environment. Things like Git, GitHub, WebLogic Server, Oracle Enterprise Pack for Eclipse, with Eclipse as an IDE, IntelliJ IDEA, Maven, some of the plugins, and so on. It's a lot of stuff, and I can say something like, just follow the default instructions during installation. But that doesn't really help us because sometimes we want to do something a bit different. Alright, so I have everything installed, guys. Unfortunately, I can't show you the process fresh from the beginning. Plus, it takes a while for everything to be installed on a hard drive. So we're doing the next best thing. I've selected the important screenshots where we're actually going to be making some changes, or screenshots to where we can use those to help us understand what's going on in the configurations. And this is specifically for installing all of the tools that we mentioned in the previous video. So previously we introduced all of the components we want to use. Now we're going to install them. And then in the next few videos, we're going to look at configuring them. So once they're installed, what changes can we make then to help us out in creating a smooth integration with our development environment. Here, we want to select both Git Bash and Git GUI. If you want to type in completely from the command line, that's perfectly fine. I would like to have both ways available to me. We're on Windows, and a GUI is convenient from time to time. Associate the files .git and .sh, that way they can run properly, and add an icon onto the desktop. You don't have to, but I use it. It's quick and convenient. Next screen, we want to use Git from Git Bash only. It says it's the safest path. You can use it from the Windows command prompt. I like to do separations of concern, so when I click on Git, or I don't want to use it from the command line. It's just a personal preference. You can do either. I don't see any problem with the second option, but I prefer the first. Moving on, I'm not entirely sure about these three options, so I can't really tell you much about them. Later on, I guess we'll find out what these files are. The first option I know works. I've experimented with it. The projects are created. Everything works fine. So select the default. This is our initial configuration screen, right? So now we're moving on to IntelliJ. We've already installed Git, we've configured it, or we haven't configured it, but we've installed it. Now we're moving on to IntelliJ. When you guys are installing that one, you want to unselect a bunch of stuff. That way you can run a little faster, right? So when you open up IntelliJ, your machine speeds up and you can hear the fans running, right? It's doing a lot of processing. I don't even know what clear case is. CVS, versioning, HG4, Perforce. I'm sure those are great. We're not gonna be using any of them. Use Git, use Subversion, and then TFS is Microsoft. We might use that later on when we're working on .NET. So just select these three, and then it will tell you down here more. So CVS, while I was working with the CVS version control system, and it tells you the features that will be available. Next, we have a lot of plugins here. We want to select almost all of them. Everything that's Java Enterprise Edition, we want to select. Spring integration for REST, Spring MVC, very important. Struts 2, we might take a look at. It's a different framework than Spring. Struts 1, we're not even going to waste our time on. So unclick that. Vaadin, not sure what that is, uncheck it. JBoss, we're not going to use anything JBoss related. We want our WebLogic, and that's good enough. And of course, when you click on them, you can take a look at the details of what they do. Hibernate, we'll be using that as a persistence framework, and for JPA, Java Persistence API. Clicking on the next screen, select the application server plugins. We have a lot of different options here, and this is a good screen because it introduces us to a lot of the options we have available. Remember, in the previous screen, we unchecked JBoss, so uncheck it here. We have Cloud Foundry, CloudBees, Geronimo, Glassfish, usually used in academia. We want to use Glassfish. We'll take a look at that later on. Heroku, JBoss, Jetty, OpenShift, Tomcat. I don't know why I didn't select Tomcat. Actually, I think I didn't select it because WebLogic and Glassfish should do us just fine, and we're not interested in wasting our time in Tomcat. It's a bit of a lighter version than WebLogic. You can take a look at what's installed, right? Run, debug, configuration dialog, integration with application server view, support for editing WebLogic specific deployment descriptors, and so on. We'll be using WebLogic almost exclusively. Clicking next, select HTML and JavaScript development plugins. Those are all good stuff, guys. We'll be using almost all of them. CSS, cascading style sheets. It does a lot of cool things for you, right? Indentation, validation of syntax, and highlighting, viewing the structured code. It does the same thing for all the other ones. HTML tools, JavaScript, extremely valuable. Quirks mode, I think they're referring to Internet Explorer. Sass and Less, they compile to CSS, but it's a different way to write CSS. We'll be using that, and we'll do tutorials on each of these later on, so that's pretty important as well. W3C validators, that's a good one as well. As you can see, a lot of these require CSS. So CSS is your cascading style sheets. It used to be part of HTML. They split it up into 2 different languages. So CSS is what creates the look and feel of your site. HTML is basically custom XML tags, right? Hypertext markup language. XML is extended markup language. XHTML is extended hypertext markup language. HTML builds your page, right? Your head, your body, the different descriptors, the different tags, paragraphs, bodies, headers, and so on. And those are basically the default versions of those things. Then you can apply CSS to each of these tags to make them behave in a different way, to make them display in a different way, right? Borders, colors, background colors, transparency, margin left, padding, table styles, and so on. And there's a lot of frameworks out there for them, and we'll take a look at that some other time. But that's why there's so many options here for that. And we'll be focusing mostly on front end, client side, and UI development. So select all of these. Also grab this. Remember when we talked about the plugin, the JetBrains IDE support? It may allow you to, we'll see how to do this at some point, how to edit HTML, CSS, and JavaScript live. And it should sync up with all JetBrains IDEs. So that should be pretty useful once we figure out how to use it to edit JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. That way we can see the changes reflect immediately in the browser. Continuing on with configurations, other plugins, we have ASP, Ant, bytecode viewer. It will basically allow us to see the Java bytecode. Copyright, coverage, Eclipse, right? We got Eclipse support. GitHub, we want GitHub support. Gradle, very important. We want, and it requires Groovy, so we want to click on that as well. Gradle is an alternative to Maven and Ant. We have Ant checked in, of course. Maven checked in. Almost everything. JUnit for Java testing. Later on, we're going to include things like Jasmine and Karma. Jasmine is our behavior-driven development JavaScript testing framework, and then Karma is our test runner built by the Angular JS team. I'm throwing a lot of things at you, but we want to. A lot of people just click next, and they don't take a look at the plugins that are available or what they do. Since we'll be using some of these things, we want to empower ourselves by knowing what they are, what they do, and how they tie in together, what the dependencies are, right? So Gradle requires Groovy, is dependent on it, and so on. So we want to click next. Once you install everything, IntelliJ should open up to this screen. You'll see the Welcome to IntelliJ idea. And now we want to do some basic configurations, right? You can create a new project or open one or check one out from version control. If you create a repository, if you want to start using, if you're on a project and somebody else is working on, or if you want to start doing versioning history right from the beginning. What we want to do though is click on configure down here, and under version control, select Git. We'll take a look at that in a second, but basically to get you started, do git bin git.exe. It wants to find the executable file, click test, make sure it works. Now we're on to installing WebLogic. So we'll see this live in Eclipse when I show you in another video. Suffice it to say that we want to manually define a new server, and we want to select the version that we downloaded. I downloaded 12.1.2. If you're working with some legacy applications, 10.3.6 or even older versions. And then server's host name, local host, that should be already manually configured. Server runtime environment, make sure that these things match up. And then let's click next. Here we're going to specify the name. We want a local server, and then we need to create a domain, our domain directory. That is where our admin server, our administrative server, is going to run, and that is for the time being where we're going to be deploying projects on WebLogic. If you want to do automatic publishing to the server, you can uncheck this. When we click next, hello world is required and cannot be removed from the server. Right, so configured hello world to work on WebLogic. Next, this is grayed out, but you can take a look at some of the options. Again, more options. Here, we want to set up the name for our domain. We want to do, I do base_domain. You can call it whatever you want. And then the location it needs to be under Oracle Middleware, Oracle Home, User Projects, Domains. We want to specify this path. And then we can specify a different password, but it already knows the default. It is welcome1. So it's going to be WebLogic for the username and then welcome1 for the password. You can take a look at some of these extensions that are added in there, executing the WebLogic script. And then next, we want to allow access to it on our network. On the bottom of WebLogic here, as you can see, it's doing starting Oracle WebLogic domain. So publishing to Oracle WebLogic. And then finally, when we do publish everything to WebLogic, and this will make more sense once we see it live in the WebLogic specific video. Here I'm kind of throwing everything together as a package deal for installation. When you're installing Oracle, the OEPE pack, just take all the default settings and configurations. And then once we get to a point to where we can run a WebLogic server, I'll show you how to execute it from within Eclipse. And that's what we're doing here. We want to navigate to this link, localhost port 7001 console. You can, at this point, you can just stop typing. You can do just console and then click enter, or you can do login/login form.jsp. And it will take you to the WebLogic administration console, where you can log in. Initially, I was when I was first starting out doing this, I was kind of confused because I didn't see the name, the username specified anywhere. But Google Searcher 2 will get you to it. You can look at the password. So it should be WebLogic and then welcome1. Click login, and then this is what we should see. And I think we're going to stop here. When we have our environment, our deployments. There's basically a lot of information on the screen. We don't care about any of it at the moment, with the exception of deployments. And then that's it. We're back to where we started at Git. So later on, I'll show you how to do deploys and configuration for WebLogic, how to configure it on Eclipse and IntelliJ. And then we'll get to a point to where we can create our web archive or WAR file and then deploy it on here, and then navigate to the link and see the welcome page to our application, to our web application. This brings us to the end of this video, folks. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know down below, and I'll see you next time on an Ecology Designs production.